And welcome to 60 Minutes of Unscripted .NET Entertainment. As doctors of .NET, we prescribe healthy choices in .NET. But unlike an actual doctor, the only tests we care that you pass are your unit tests. I'm your host, Cam Soper, with your co-hosts, Scott Addy and David Pine. And we'd like to welcome today's guests, Christos Matskas. Christos, please introduce yourself.
Nice to be here. I struggle with my surname as well, so don't worry about it. It's a known fact. It is a known fact. My wife of 15 years now, she still struggles with pronouncing a surname. So hey, it's a thing, right? Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Christos Matskas. I'm a program manager for the Microsoft Identity Division, and I work as a developer advocate, PM kind of thing, trying to help developers build more secure software.
Awesome. So with that, I think we have a relevant checkup. So let's dive in. What do we got, Scott?
All right. What we have here is a quick start from the Azure Active Directory conceptual doc set on docs.microsoft.com. I hate to disappoint you all and you, Cam, as well, but there are no unit tests in this sample app associated with this quick start. We test everything in production. So what this doc is all about is adding sign-on capabilities to your existing ASP.NET Core web app. The prereq here, the primary one that I'll point out, is you would need to have .NET Core 3.1 or later, the SDK that is, installed on your development machine. This particular doc will highlight two approaches to configuring your app. And I just actually noticed that this title should say Microsoft Identity. Perfect opportunity here for anyone who wants to submit a pull request. This is going to use Microsoft Identity. It's going to show you two approaches. There's an automatic configuration approach, which will involve setting up an app registration in the Azure portal. If you prefer to configure everything manually, we have steps for that outlined here as well. The real meat of this article is towards the bottom here, and I'm going to spend some time talking through that. So in any ASP.NET Core application, you're going to see this startup.cs file. Inside of there will be a configure services method. And a couple of things to point out here. So you're going to see this add authentication method being invoked right up at the top of that method. What this is doing is it's going to register authentication services and handlers for whatever handler you choose to tack on here. In this case, it's the Microsoft Identity handler that would be used. We're going to set the default authentication scheme for OIDC, OpenID Connect, by passing this argument here when we set up the auth-n service. And that authentication scheme is just responsible for generating the correct set of claims. Further down here, we have some other stuff going on in the method. Essentially, what this chunk of code here is saying is, hey, we require a user to be authenticated before they can be authorized. Makes sense, right? We are telling the app, hey, we're using Razor Pages in this particular case. So it's a ASP.NET Core 3.1 Razor Pages app. We are going to add on the Razor class library that pulls in a default controller and Razor Pages that are used for account management, sign in, sign out, things like that. So you don't need to build those UI components yourself. Simply call this method and it'll work its magic. Further down, you'll see talk of configuration in your app settings.json file. I'll pull open Visual Studio briefly. Here is the sample app that is associated with this quick start. And if you look at your app settings file, you're going to notice a couple of things in here. This Azure AD section is what is expected out of the box when we go to our startup file. when this add Microsoft Identity web app method is invoked, you can see it is expecting a configuration section called Azure AD. And if we look over there, a couple of things I'll point out here. You've got your instance up here within that Azure AD object literal, which is just saying, hey, this is the value login.microsoftonline.com that is used for Azure public cloud instance customers. The tenant ID further down has a value of common out of the box. We don't need to change this either. It's simply saying sign in users with any work or school accounts or even a Microsoft personal account. Finally, I'll point out the client ID. This is your application ID that you will obtain from the Azure portal. Last but not least, to make all of this work, you're going to need two NuGet packages. They're right here, Microsoft Identity Web and Microsoft Identity Web UI. And again, it's this UI package that's providing those UI components for account management. So that's what this quick start is all about. Some more code samples here. Definitely check that out. Back over to you, Cam.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Hey, let's dive into a hallway track. All right. So, Christos, I'm guessing that what you're going to be talking about today is going to be like the doc that Scott just walked us through, but like a few levels deeper.
Yeah, we're going to be doing it live.
Awesome.
Today.
More code, more better.
More code, more better.
And then we did have a question right away.
We did a few questions.
Yeah, Jose was asking specifically about .NET 6, and I think that's perfectly relevant to this conversation. So I think we'll address that as part of the show. You said, Christos?
We will. I mean, we can start with that now if you want to. So,
let's do it.
So technically, .NET 6 is still in preview, so we haven't really finalized anything. But from an identity perspective, we're not really changing anything core. Because the biggest change that we did around .NET and identity was the Microsoft Identity.web package that we released back in September, which went into GA. I think we're currently at version 12, like 1.12, or 1.9. We've seen a few iterations and we've added capabilities and features, and we took the input from the community. It's actually an open source library, so anybody can go and look into the library and see what it does for you. It's a fantastic tool because, as you saw from the walkthrough that Scott did, it has taken a lot of the code and the wiring that I had to do in the past and abstracted it behind the scenes for you. You still have access to it if you want to. And .NET 6 will still continue to work with that package. So technically, nothing really changes there. The biggest thing that is coming to identity, and it's almost there, it's the continuous access evaluation, which is something we can cover now or we can talk about it later. But continuous access evaluation will allow you to have a more robust application because you don't have to have short-lived access tokens. And at the same time, it allows you to revoke access to a resource by revoking that access token, and then the application can respond to that. So if I sign in now to my email and I receive a call from my manager saying, Christos, it was great working with you. We had a fantastic year. Thank you very much. We're letting you go. It means that with the current setup, I still have access to my email for another hour before they can revoke it. Whereas with continuous access evaluation, the IT admin, the Azure Active Directory admin can go and revoke access to my email instantly. Outlook can listen to that and then revoke access to my email. So that token becomes invalid as soon as that access is revoked. So continuous access evaluation is a fantastic thing because it will allow us to have longer lived tokens. We can have a 24-hour token or a 48-hour token, and we don't have to go back to Azure Active Directory to validate that. But at any point, it can be pushed back, and I can lose access to my resources. Therefore, companies can have more robust solutions there and more secure solutions. So that is something that is coming. Right now, we only provide that for first-party APIs, i.e. Graph, Exchange. I think it's SharePoint, the third one. Don't quote me on that. There will be an announcement, a build that says, we're working towards that. But the RFC has not been ratified yet, and we're not alone in this. We want the whole industry to agree on what the format will be. So eventually, you'll be able to create an API, your own APIs, that inherit from that and it can push that capability. And then your clients can also listen to events like access revocation and respond to that accordingly. So hold on tight while we're working on this, but there's MFA, there is continuous access evaluation, there's conditional access. These are all the tools that are available to you as a developer for free. So
I would like to just commend Christos for not saying CAE. There's enough alphabet soup in the security space. So he did say continuous access evaluation. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Now that you mentioned that, I'm going to go back to CAE. No, it makes sense. There's another question from Aaron about profile management with B2C. So that's a very specific question to B2C. In Azure Active Directory, you don't manage your profile or it's managed by you, for you in the Azure Active Directory. But B2C is something that you interact as an external user, and therefore you might want to change your default name. You might want to change your email. You might want to change something that is not independent. And therefore, B2C provides you with a flow that can be used to edit profiles. So you have a sign-in and a sign-up flow that allow users to sign up and sign into the application. But if they want to edit their profile, you need to create a flow first. And you can either use the built-in user flows, or you can use the experience framework, the identity experience framework, IEF, to create a custom policy that does a lot more than just the default stuff. So first, you create a policy, then you invoke it from your application. But the nice thing about that is that you don't have to write any code whatsoever. It's all managed for you by the B2C tenant. There you go. I don't think we have any other questions, do we? For Blazor.
For Blazor, that's a good one.
Blazor. Everybody wants Blazor. You know what? Maybe we can do a demo with Blazor and B2C today. I have one ready for you.
Let's do it.
For Blazor WebAssembly, I assume that WA, authentication process is the same. Well, it is and it isn't. So we talked about the Microsoft Identity Platform, the Microsoft Identity.web library, which is a server-side component. So anything ASP.NET Core can use it. Blazor server-side can also use the Microsoft Identity.web, but Blazor WebAssembly, it is a client-side framework, right? So it's JavaScript executing in the browser. Therefore, we cannot use Microsoft Identity.web. There is the MSAL browser, and there's a wrapper inside the Blazor template that will wrap around that and will integrate. So there's a SIM between the client and the .NET code that you write to allow you to interoperate between the client server, the client side execution, and your .NET components. And there are some idiosyncrasies as well when it comes to Blazor WebAssembly. So, for example, you have to request all the access tokens upfront as you sign in the user, because again, there's no interaction with the browser, right? So you cannot do it dynamically. There's no dynamic consent as well, so you cannot request another token for another resource or escalate step up authentication inside the application. So once the user signs up, they sign up, they gather access tokens, and now they can access them. In fact, we can walk through the code as I did that for B2C and show you how it works using the latest thing. It's .NET 5.
So that's kind of a limitation, right? Like if they're not able to step up authentication, and so I mean, I could see that being something that developers would actually want, right? Eventually is like, they firstly, they get logged in, and then they want to navigate to different resources. So that's interesting.
We're working to make the experience better, but again, Blazor WebAssembly, it's you gather WebAssembly, you dump it into the browser, and then execute. So it's not as flexible as, say, running pure JavaScript, or it's not as flexible as running a server-side web app. So I get it. Pros and cons, right? It's still, I think, it's still early days for WebAssembly. We'll see a lot more coming into that, and identity being one of these components.
Well, and I guess it does really, vary based on your individual application needs, right? Not everyone needs to have fully baked identity with different scoping requirements and all that. And they can just, sometimes you might just need to authenticate a user just to validate that, right? So it depends.
That's it.
Really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You can have a very basic front-end WebAssembly that just authenticates users and allows them to do stuff. And you might not need an access token because the application will do it on your behalf, or like it might not execute on your behalf. So the application may be accessing storage or say Cosmos, and then the application will act based on your authorization policies and permissions. But after that, it's the application authenticating to Azure, not you. And therefore, it might not be an issue anymore.
Right.
All these different scenarios. So what do you want to do next? Do we want to do a brand new web app and see how we wire it up and make it run? And then we can do Blazor and then other stuff as well. What do you think?
Yeah,
Let's do it.
Let's see some code.
Let's see some code. So there is, I'm going to be using .NET 5, and here we're going to create a new directory. If I can spell today, .NET show. And then we'll change the directory. That is I think it should be okay here, .NET show. And now it's clear. We can do .NET new. And let's go with plain Blazor pages. We can do MVC. We can do gRPC if you want to. Anything that is supported in ASP.NET Core will be using Microsoft.NET.Web. So .NET new, we'll say web app. And then to wire up the authentication out of the box, we can do single auth, --auth. And here you can define whether you want to do a single tenant, whether you want to do multi-tenant, whether you want to use Azure Active Directory or B2C. We have those templates supported out of the box for you. And even if you haven't done it before, there's actually in Microsoft.NET.Web, we have a template, a global tool for .NET for the CLI to allow you to do that. This experience currently is more wired towards the CLI, but we are working very, very hard with the Visual Studio team to actually make that experience consistent. And if you're in Visual Studio and you love Visual Studio, you should be able to file new project, add authentication, and guide you through the same experience as you do with the CLI. So auth, and we'll say single org. So in these systems, we're going to use a single tenant, single org, and that's it. So right now, it's going to create a template, and the next step will be to open this in code.
By the way, for folks who hadn't seen that command line auth option before, keep in mind you can pass the -H flag there, and there's some really useful help that'll show you what your options are.
That is a very good point. Thank you. So let's see what we have in our project. All right, this is the vanilla as it comes out of the box. We have the Microsoft.NET.Web, the library that we talked about, which is wiring up the middleware for us. And we have the web.ui, which will wire up the sign in and sign out pages, so we don't have to create them manually ourselves, right? This is the nice thing about the library. It does it all for us. You can still customize all the authentication pages if you want to, but let's say most people don't really want to touch these. They just want to authenticate, grab a token, and move on to the next task. But it's all configurable. So with these libraries installed and Visual Studio Code restored it for us, let's look into the settings. I think Scott already walked us through this, but this is where we configure the MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library settings for Microsoft.NET.Web, to know which tenant you want to use, which client application you need to use, and we'll create one in a second, and where to receive the token. So the callback path is important. It needs to match what you configure inside Azure Active Directory. As long as they match, everything should work out of the box. And we'll configure this in a second. But let's move into the code. So the code is technically 2 lines of code. You'll see line 32 says add authentication. And next we say we want to authenticate a web app. We can actually improve on this and make it a single line of code, which I love doing all the time, because why not, right? Less code to worry about. So services.add Microsoft, you can see web app authentication or web API authentication. Obviously, we're in web app authentication, so we'll do that. And all we have to do here is if everything is at default, we have to pass the configuration. Because, again, what we saw before, it was just defaults to Azure AD and defaults to the protocol, which was OpenID Connect. So technically, that's all we need to do here. The policy is exactly the same. So we expect everyone to use the default policy, which is you have to sign in before you can access any of the pages. And in line 41, we say, since we're using Azure Pages, let's wire up the UI to allow us to sign in and sign out and drive the user interaction with the authentication.
Christos, I have a real quick question.
Go for it.
So at the add, with the services.add, I can't remember the full extension method name. Add Microsoft Identity. So,
Web
yeah.
app authentication. Yep.
Yep, that's the one. Where does that extension method come from? I presume that's from a NuGet package that's in the project file.
It is in the Microsoft Identity.web.
Okay, so that's
the package I mentioned. Yeah.
That's and just as a reminder, that's the package that was mentioned in that document that we reviewed earlier in the show.
That is correct. Although we do have an old reference here. It's like 1.1. We should be using 1.9. So always make sure you upgrade your packages. Let's go and do it now. Why not? Right? Let's be brave. Let's break. I mean, it's not a scripted show, right? Why not? Let's restore things. Have so much confidence that everything will work out of the box. Right? All restored, all good. And you go back in the code and everything's broken. Right. Okay. So that's all we need. 1.9 has added some really nice capabilities. You should look at the release documentation that we put out there. But the biggest and most exciting one is they can actually acquire a token now to go and call services, Azure services, on behalf of the user. So if you want to call into storage, you can use the exact same library. You don't have to use Azure.identity. Scott is looking at me like, man, what are you doing to me now? But if you want to use, like if you authenticate as a user and you want to call into storage as that user, then Microsoft Identity.web has a wiring for you to do that now. Azure Identity has, total valid case scenarios for most of the cases. So I don't think the 1.9 capabilities will be something that most people are using, but it is something that was requested before. And now we have a really nice integration between the Azure SDKs and Microsoft Identity.web.
Out of curiosity, Christos, could you go back to the CS proj? I'm curious about one of the aspects here, specifically, and this is more or less just kind of an open question about versioning and naming things. Sure. 1.9, was there a reason why this package or some of the related packages wouldn't want to follow the other versioning schemes put in place with some of the .NET Core bits and .NET 5 and stuff like that? Like this is 1.9. I would have assumed that if it's built and compatible with some of the other stuff, it would have been like version
5.0.
Yeah. So
it came out as part of 3.1 back in September. So we didn't have 5.0 back then. I think it was still in preview. And I think the package hasn't changed between 3.1 and 5. So I don't know if we need to follow that convention, but if we need to, then I can take it back to the team and say, well, we need to stay consistent with the rest of the naming package. So
yeah, it's just more or less an open-ended question. I'm kind of curious what some of our viewers would think about that specifically. It's been one of those things where, as a consumer and developer of stuff like this, like I know that when there's like a major version increment, that like typically all the packages will align, and it's really nice to have that because it's like this mental model that I know that if I'm using Microsoft *** whatever the package is, that it's kind of in parity with some of those major .NET release versions. So it was just more or less a question. So
I see. Yeah. I don't know. Are we going to create a fork and then have a 1.x and then a 5.x for the versions? I mean, is that going to add more confusion or less confusion? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I see what you're saying, because I've noticed that a lot of packages have a 5.x version now. And I don't know if they jumped from 2.x to 5 just to stay consistent, but maybe that's something that we need to connect internally and discuss, because if that's the expectation for the .NET paradigm going forward, then I think we need to abide to that rather than going our own way. By the way, this NuGet package is owned by us, the identity division.
Yeah.
And we work with DevDiv to make sure that the experience remains and becomes consistent across all the tools.
And it says that there's someone chiming in here. Moro Codes says that they personally like the non-framework package having their own versioning. So again, I was curious. I was just curious. So
no, it's fine. It's fine. All right. So we have the wiring. We have everything we need in our pages. If I remember correctly, in index, we have a requirement to be because we're using a policy. We're not really, adding anything special here. So all the pages will require a user to be authenticated.
Well, I'm going to play the naive person here and say, whoa, what is a policy and how does that work?
Well, an authorization policy is something that says once you are through the door, how do I want you to access the rest of the application? So authentication does the who you are. Let's get you through the door. And then authorization will be like, what can you do once you're through the door, right? Which rooms can you go to? Which controllers can you access? And therefore, it becomes the driving force for ensuring that not only do you apply security at the front door, but also security within your application. So you might want to have users with different roles accessing different parts of the application. Again, this is a very vanilla experience, so it doesn't really have a lot of stuff. But imagine you have a web app that calls into SQL, and only certain people should be actually accessing the data. Or you might have a controller that reads the data from SQL, and then you have another controller action that writes to that. So you might want to say only certain people with certain roles or people that belong to certain groups can actually write to the database. And that's where you would be using a policy.
So if I understand that correctly, policies can be applied for enforcing authentication as well as more granular authorization.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome.
What is the color scheme? It is. I love that question. Like, let's stop everything and let's talk about themes. So it is if I go into my color theme, I use bearded theme because it needs to match my beard. I found it. I didn't create that. I promise. It was there before I even had my beard. So I use the black and amethyst, but it has a lot of different themes. So I think some people say you need to use a white theme or a light theme when you do the demos. Do you want to switch to that? Happy to switch, but I think it's readable. So
yeah, it's definitely readable. Okay. It's a fuzzy alternative to clean shaven, so we'll accept it.
But I see like 3 out of the 4 here have beards, so I think the majority wins, right?
Definitely.
Okay.
I need to shave. Does that count?
That counts.
It's fine.
I wanted to point out something. So when Christos was talking about authentication and authorization was brought up, I wanted to point out a common area of confusion. So in your startup CS file where you add the middleware for auth-n and auth-z, the ordering there is important, believe it or not. So your auth-n middleware should be registered in the HTTP pipeline before the auth-z. I point this out because I've seen a ton of GitHub issues asking, well, what's going on? I mean, why doesn't it work if I change the ordering here? So order does matter.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that is very, very true with all middleware, right? It's not exclusive to just auth-z and auth8. But middleware runs as like a pipeline and it's sequential. So one thing in that pipeline of middleware could terminate and then respond right away. And then, with that short circuiting, order is very, very important.
And I love how easy it is to tap into that pipeline and make customization. But that also brings the danger of screwing up the ordering and then things not working in the expected way. So thanks for raising that, Scott, because it is something that can catch you unaware.
It'd be really easy to implement like Chaos Monkey as a middleware that just at random will, short circuit or throw an exception. Just, have that be in your pipeline and randomly short circuit or throw an exception and then boom, chaos ensues.
Yes. Talking about testing, right? You guys love your testing. Okay, so let's go and actually configure this baby and run it and see how much it takes to run it. So far we have let's go back and summarize. We have 1 line of code here to add the middleware for authentication to use Azure Active Directory. We have the default policy, which was already there, so we didn't have to write anything. We have 1 extra line in 41, so that's, let's say, 4 lines of code, and then we have to wire up the middleware with use authentication, user authorization. So that's 5 lines of code, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's already pre-configured for us. So that's 5 configuration settings. So let's add this. We're gonna use my domain, so cmatskas dot on Microsoft.com. I have to use my name and surname because I'm vain. Thank you. I will take that. And then we have to go into our Azure Active Directory and create an app registration. So an app registration in the Azure Active Directory is us registering our intent to use Azure Active Directory as our authentication endpoint. Like we're saying, you know what, I'm going to use you to authenticate my users, and then you have to say what kind of platform you're going to use. We'll see that in a second. Now, if you don't have Azure Active Directory, so that means that you don't have Microsoft Office 365 and you don't have an Azure subscription, they both come with a default Azure Active Directory for you to use. But let's say you work in a very restricted environment, in a very restricted enterprise, and you cannot really do much, or you cannot even create operating stations because you're locked down. We have the Microsoft 365 developer program, which you can use to actually get a full Azure Active Directory tenant. You can join for free. It's free forever. As long as you sign in once every 90 days, then you get data for free, you get calendar events, you get email for free, and it allows you to act as a full admin to that tenant. It's a P2 Azure Active Directory, so it comes with all the bells and whistles that you would expect from Azure Active Directory, which as a developer, it's a fantastic tool to quickly test and evolve your solution, and then take that and go back to your admin and say, this is what we need, this is how we need to set it up. So I'm actually using a test tenant because I don't want to put my corporate emails on the demo. In fact, I couldn't even do that because I would be blocked by MSIT. So I'm not even allowed to do that. So full freedom comes with a Microsoft Developer 365 tenant. And that gives me a full Azure Active Directory, not tethered to Azure and Azure subscription. That's important. If you need to test that with an Azure subscription, so let's say I want to authenticate with Azure Identity and User Service Principal. If they're not, if your Microsoft 365 developer tenant is not tied to an Azure subscription, you won't be able to use that. So it comes with some prerequisites. So anyway, we're in the app registrations. Let's create one.
And we did have some questions. I don't know if they're appropriate to ask now, but I'll throw them up and see if they are, and you can get to them either now or in a minute. So Dorian asks, are you able to call APIs that are registered in Azure AD from apps that are registered in Azure AD B2C?
Nope, because there are two different issuers, right? It's two total different systems. One is for external users, one is for internal users. However, in saying that, you can add Azure Active Directory as an identity provider to your B2C. Therefore, you can have a scenario where you have a B2C login page where people can sign in either with their username and password, or a social media account, or an Azure Active Directory account. And then based on that, you will be able to authenticate against Azure Active Directory. However, the tokens that will be issued to your applications will be through B2C. And therefore, even though you sign in with your Azure Active Directory account, it's B2C that will issue the tokens in the end once the authentication takes place. It's the same as going into Google, signing in, and then coming back to B2C. B2C will still be the one that issues the tokens for you. So therefore, if you want to be able to access your APIs, they need to be registered in the same B2C tenant.
Awesome. That's a very good explanation. Thank you for that. We also have another one here. It says, if I use social auth, like Google, Facebook, do we still need to use Azure AD?
That's a good question, and one that is quite overloaded. And I'm going to go into things like external identities, and it's confusing. So two scenarios. One is you have an Azure Active Directory. It's your enterprise Azure Active Directory. Everyone signs in with @Microsoft or @Contoso, but you have a vendor that is not part of your organization and needs to sign in. We allow now in Azure Active Directory for people to sign in and invite it with their Gmail or Outlook or Hotmail or Yahoo account. Is Yahoo still around? There must be still Yahoo accounts. I think
no, definitely, yeah.
Yahoo.com, right? So any or even I think you can allow other social media providers to sign in. Now this is a guest into your Azure Active Directory tenant, so you need Azure Active Directory needs to be configured for that. But it's the most common scenario is you have Azure Active Directory B2C acting as a hub to allow people to use any identity they want. So username and password, or Gmail, or any other OpenID Connect provider. Gmail is one of them. And then Azure Active Directory B2C will act as the mediator between your app and the third-party provider. And therefore, you have your B2C acting as the front gate, and B2C is the one that will issue the tokens back to your application. In ASP.NET, you can still, if you use ASP.NET Identity can still directly integrate with Google. But one of the reasons why we don't recommend doing it that way is that it doesn't scale as well as using B2C, and it's not secure, and you don't have one central way to manage all your users. That's why we recommend using an identity provider. So back to our demo. Is that? I hope that covers it. But if there are any follow-up questions, let us know.
It made sense to me.
Web. So we'll name it .NET Docs Web. Let me make it slightly bigger so everybody can see this. I'll leave everything else as default, and I'll register the app. So this is the beginning of showing our intent. Let's maximize this. Let's come here. So now we have the app registration. Let's grab this very, very quickly. Come back to our codes.
And so everyone knows these tenant IDs and client IDs and subscription IDs and all this stuff will be changed immediately following the show.
Well, there will be no secret. This is nothing secret here. So I know it's a tight balance because I used to hide them in the past, and I joined the division like, no, this is not something secret. So this is good. It's okay information to share. If I were creating a client secret or I had a certificate, then that's a very good case for me to replace that. But we're not doing that now. So we copy the application ID. Yeah, go on. I think there's a question there.
Oh, we say the same thing about David's cell phone number. It's not secret. Display in plain text all day long.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it will be deleted soon. No.
I've been writing it on walls all over town. So
nice.
In bathroom stalls.
So Christos, you created the app registration directly in the Azure portal, I think, as most people do.
Yes.
If I wanted to create that from the Azure CLI, is that possible? And if so, how painful is that?
There's an Azure AD app registration you can do, but it is straightforward. It's straightforward to create like a simple app registration, but it's not straightforward to create a more complex scenario where you might want to say, I want to automate create an Azure Active Directory app registration that calls into an API and therefore needs to have some scopes and what have you. You can provide the scopes as a manifest so that you can have a JSON file that you can pass in, and then you define all these different settings inside that manifest file. You can name it whatever you want. And it's in JSON format, and that command can actually take it. But I have something more exciting to show you, which is going to be something that we're going to talk about at Build as well. Do you want to see it? Should we take a break? Because this is even more exciting than what we're seeing here now.
So wait a second.
As long as it's not YAML.
It's not YAML.
Okay.
To be clear, we're going to show something live on our show before Build. That's going to be shared at Build. Wow, that's cool. That's cool right there. I think that's a round of applause worthy moment, I think.
Well, let's see it first, and then you can tell me if it's.
Oh yeah, maybe it'll be a flop. I'm building it up, all the hype, and then people are going to make.
So, well, I hope it's not going to be a flop because it has so much potential. So we talked about app registrations. Have you guys heard of .NET Interactive?
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yes, we've heard of it. Oh yeah.
So I took some time over the weekend to automate the app provisioning or app registration provisioning for your apps using .NET Interactive. So it will do everything for you in the order that you expected, and it will cover the scenarios that you need. So as you can see here, I have a .NET Interactive that does exactly what Scott added or implied. And you can do it with Python, you can do it with .NET, but I love .NET, so why not do it in C#, right? So we're using Graph to go, and here it will prompt us to authenticate. I'm not going to do that now. And then later on, you can create an API app registration. Once that gets created, then down here, you can create a service principal for it. So it creates the behind-the-scenes service principal so we can use it in our tenant. And then I can create a web app that relies on that API and automatically adds the scope. So down here, I have the scopes from my API automatically embedded into the app registration, and you end up with a whole wiring app. And all you have to do is just copy the client ID and the tenant ID, and off you go. And this is going to be pretty cool because I want to take that into all our repos, all our code samples, and say, if you want to run this sample, run this .NET Interactive. And because you can embed comments and Markdown, it actually guides you through the experience of why we're doing it and how we're doing it and what you need to change, and even make it into the docs. So the sample that Scott showed earlier on, the walkthrough, can actually benefit from this one. So you don't have to follow step by step and then miss a step and then something doesn't work properly. You run the code from the docs, and we'll do it for you. Boom. I think that's awesome. Like, I'm more excited about that than all the identity stuff I've done in the past 6 months. Although, I'm not gonna take all the credit for the amazing work that the team has been doing around .NET and stuff. But this is something that we're looking into adding into everything to automate the app provisioning, because I know this is a confusing topic, as you'll see in a second. Right. So here, back into our app registration, we did the first step, which was creating the app registration. Now we need to say how we're going to authenticate the users, right? That's very important. Right now, we cannot authenticate anyone because we don't have a platform. So nicely here, it says what kind of application you want to authenticate. We have web apps, we support SPAs, we support native mobile apps, and then we also support mobile and Xamarin and UWP and console and IoT devices and everything else you want. So
real quick question on that.
Yeah, go for it.
So there was one that said web app versus single page app.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought of those being like synonymous, right? Like the single page app is a web app.
It's a web app. It is, but it doesn't say web app there. It says web. So this expects to be a server-side web app. So Node, Java, Python, .NET, obviously, something that runs on the server. So unlike SPAs that run on the client, they make totally different usage of different packages and what have you. So for SPAs, we have a different library, and they will have a different wire app for how you can receive your tokens, including the authentication flows.
So would server-side Blazor be on web, and then Blazor WebAssembly, WASM, would be over on single-page app?
Yes, correct. So let's say if you didn't know what you were doing and you don't know what you have to do, we have a fantastic quick start guide here that says, hey, what do you want to create? And you'll notice that for web app, we have, let's say, web app. Down here, you'll notice Blazor server, right?
Perfect. Look at that.
And then if we want to change that, we can say, well, I want to create an SPA. And here we have Blazor WebAssembly. The nice thing is that it can actually go through these, and let's press this one.
It's kind of like this was scripted, but this part was not scripted. This was not at all.
This was not scripted, no. Well, we have a tutorial, so it won't wire it up yet for you. But let's say we're doing JavaScript, vanilla, no framework there, right? So in here, we'll say, as long as you have these prerequisites, then I can make the changes for you in the app registration, and then I can give you a sample zip file with everything wired up for you, so you can press F5 and run the application. Hopefully, Blazor will be one of them that we do also all the changes for you and make it run. So
love it.
So this is for people that have no experience in doing that and want to see how the code is wired up. We know what we're doing. Hopefully. So hopefully. Right, let's go back. Add the platform. Here we're doing web. And remember, we have to make sure that the redirect URI is correct. Otherwise, the tokens will end up in some random place and authentication will blow. So HTTPS, running on Kestrel.net. So it's localhost 5001. And then sign in OIDC. And out of the box, unfortunately, we use hybrid flow. Something between implicit and auth code. We're not using Pixie out of the box yet. So I need to select these two. Implicit flow, by the way, it's not secure enough because it sends stuff on the browser, and therefore it can be intercepted and people can access your information. We want to avoid that as much as possible. We're working with the team to move to auth code with Pixie in .NET as well. It is supported, but it's not part of the template. So when you do file a new project, it doesn't have the auth code with Pixie as default. But we're going to go with what is there now if you're doing the same experience. So if you're watching this later, you can walk through the same stuff yourself. So that's all we need to do. And then we have everything we need. So technically, if I go back into my code now, we have everything. Remember, sign in OIDC matches. Let's save this one. I've done the mistake of not saving things before and didn't work. There you go. And now we can do .NET run and see the magic happen. It will build and run for us. So I'm being confident in my code working. It's building. Right. So listening at port 5001. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. There you go. So before I even access any of the web pages, I'm prompted to sign in. We're using my test tenant, so it's the first one, cmatskas.microsoft.com. It's the first time I'm using the application, and I need to consent. This is very important. The consent framework is a fantastic way for you as a user to approve the app to access your data. I could be asking, here the developer can also ask for your emails, for access to your profile. It could be asking for access to your calendar. And if you don't want as a user to provide consent, you don't have to, right? So it's very important for the developer to only ask for what they need in the application at the time that they need it, and also for the user to actually review this and consent to the right stuff. Also, if you ever get prompted for a sign-in randomly while you're browsing the web, and you get prompted with this thing, if it looks dodgy, you can actually report it. And come down here and say, these look like an app that I haven't, approved, or this name sounds super weird, right? I haven't seen this before. Why am I being prompted? You can report it, and then your IT admin can go and look into why there's a rogue application running in your tenant.
Well, what if someone somehow injects this page and they heard this recommendation to report it, and the recommended HTML actually redirects to a malicious page when they're trying to report it?
Well, yes, I can see what you're saying there. But if your app, something will need to intersect your app requesting authentication against Azure AD and be able to spoof the URL, right?
Is this customizable to this any of this user experience here?
We've added some capabilities to change the UI. It's not fully customizable. I think you can add your logos, your company logos, your enterprise name as well, to make it look and feel more like your company. But if you want full customization, then that's B2C. Usually it's where we see the consistent experience between leaving the website, going to some other page to authenticate. You want users to feel like it's part of the application, not something alien. So that's where full customization comes in. But if you want to see more customization, please let us know. The team is always open to feedback.
And then
remember, this is enterprise, right?
Another quick question about this is, I noticed that when you first navigate to the site must be holistically kind of locked down and secured, because then you get prompted. It's not like you have some sort of initial landing page and then the option to log in. So,
well, you can change that by going into your, if you want just the home landing page to be unauthenticated, back into your app, you can go into your pages, and in here in index.cshtml, you can say
allow anonymous, and then at that point they would get the login capability, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So that will be, hey, you land to the page. Now, if you want to go anywhere in the site, you have to authenticate. And you can have as many pages as you want as allow anonymous. And because we have this blank default policy, it will apply to all the pages unless you explicitly ignore it. You can have no policy, and then you can say, any users that come in have to authorize, right? So we'll do authorization and authentication on the page. So it depends on what kind of security you want to have on your pages.
Awesome,
so
thank you.
Back to the app. No, that's fine. And then let's say accept. I can also consent as the whole app because I am the admin on this tenant. Remember, it's fun to be a full admin. And that's it. With 4 lines of code and 4 configuration settings, we have full authentication, fully scalable to billions of users if you need to, without having to do any effort. And if we had 2FA authentication, I think my tenant has, but I'm already signed in. In fact, let's see. I can't remember. If I sign out, I will sign out totally from the app because I want to be prompted for MFA, right? So if we go back, host 5,000, signed out, sign in. This one, oh God, I don't remember my password. Fun times.
You should do the forgot my password experience. No.
Well, no. Go password manager to the rescue. Check this out. 2FA, right? So as a developer, I didn't have to write any code to get that capability.
Ooh, nice.
It's part of my IT admin provisioning. Oh God. let's skip that part. We'll do it later. I didn't realize. I've been signing for so long that I haven't been prompted for. I'll change it later. Right? It's an unscripted show, and I know people are dying to see Blazor. So let's switch to a Blazor example. In fact, for this Blazor example, I'm using B2C as well. So let's see if I can find it.
So we do have a question, Christos, about the pricing for what you just demoed. Do I need the salary of a greater Scott to afford to do what you just pulled off?
Well, Azure Active Directory is free to you if you already have Azure or an M365 an M365 subscription. So if you use Office at work, you already have an Azure Active Directory, and if you use Azure, you already have an Azure Active Directory there. There are certain capabilities that require a P1 or a P2 subscription. So think advanced conditional access capabilities will require a different pricing, but this is something that needs to be discussed. But it's unlimited users for Azure Active Directory, so you don't have to pay for it. For B2C, you need you get 50,000 monthly active users for free. So that means 50,000 users can register in your app and sign in as many times as they want within a month, which is a fantastic free product. I think once you hit 50,000, that's a good problem to have, and you can start charging for your application. So we give you a lot of leeway to build your app, build your startup, build your solution to the point that it becomes profitable to start paying for it. And then it's the benefit cost analysis of how much do you get out of the box instead of writing your own identity solution and trying to scale that yourself and what have you. So most of the companies go, I'm happily paying for these capabilities once I hit that threshold. Right, I think our demo is test Blazor server. No, is it Blazor server B2C? I thought I had a WebAssembly one. Oh, Blazor WebAssembly B2C. There you go. I knew that. Blazor WebAssembly B2C. So let's open this in code. And you can see I have a .NET 5 branch already. And let's see what we have in here. So it consists of two projects. One is the Blazor API, which is our web API authenticating with B2C. And let me make this bigger. So here we have an API that authenticates with B2C, right? Not Azure AD, so not the default settings as we saw before. And then we need to add cores. Cores will bite you in the backside if you don't. If you're not careful about that. So I want that. And then down here, we have the exact same authentication authorization for our API. So our API now expects an access token that was issued by B2C, and it will validate that. And in the controller, it will check for certain things. We have authorize, we have an API controller, and down here, we have a require scope. So not only do we expect an access token that was issued by B2C, but we also expect that our access token has a specific scope called access as user. It can be anything you want to name it. And if that scope is not present, then it will blow up and say, well, you're not authorized to actually access this. You get a 401, which means you're through the door, but you don't have the scope. So a 403 comes back to you. You can use the required scope, which is a new kind of attribute that we added for Microsoft Identity.web, or you can use the HTTP context, verify user has any accepted scopes, and we can pass an array of scopes here to check that the user has the right scopes in their token, or the token has the right scopes for the user. So that's our API, and let's go and run this. So cd API, run. So our API will be listening for any incoming calls. There you go. And listening at port 8080 because we can't have both running at port 5000. It will blow up. And then let's go into our WebAssembly and see how this is wired up for us. So in our client, we have the WebAssembly, and there's no startup, so everything needs to happen in the program. So in the program, we have a couple of things here. One is the, let's see, which one do I want to start with first? So let's go with the wiring up of the authentication. Add MSAL authentication here, right? Different paradigm because we are using MSAL browser for this. We say we're going to use Azure Active Directory B2C. And then below, remember how we talked about scopes that we need to request them up front for our resources? This is where it happens. We say, not only do I want you to sign in the user, but I want you to grab an access token that I need to use later on. Then we have a weather API client. So we're creating a custom API, a named API for our API that we're going to use later on. It creates an HTTP client named that. And then in there, we say what the URL endpoint, the base URL is. And also, how do we want to pass the token? So rather than me trying to pass the authorization header every time I do that call, we can wire it up so it can automatically add it as part of the outgoing HTTP call. And therefore, I don't have to manually do it all the time, as long as I use that HTTP client. And the custom authorization message handler is the one that does the token passing back and forth. So this is something that I wired up here. This one has the scope that we need to pass in. And it passes the token provider and authenticates for us and adds the scopes here and the authorized URLs. So with that wiring up in the middleware, if you want to call it, then in my pages, which is the fetch data, we're actually embedding that HTTP client factory. And in my code, I'm getting the weather API named HTTP client that has everything wired up for us. And then all I need to do is just do a get async and get the data in. So let's run this and see how it runs in action.
And it looked like there must be a Azure AD B2C section in your.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah, I skipped through that. So in here, in Blazor, we don't have an app settings. Well, we have an app settings suggestion, but it's in a different place. So for that, we say Azure Active Directory B2C is the one that we're using. We have an authority, which is the actual endpoint. And you can see here that we're actually passing the sign-in, sign-out policy. It needs to be part of that authority URL. And then the client ID. So we need to have that registered. And I know we have only 4 minutes, so I want to be quick and so in action so people can see it. By the way, this is all checked into source control. I can share the links later if you want them. So we're gonna run. 3 minutes to go. We can do this.
Wait for it.
So we have a landing page, but I'm not signed in. Let's click on the sign in or login. We load up the B2C. See, a very different sign-in experience now. So I'm going to say yes, and I'm signing in with my Outlook account.
Did you forget your password for that one?
Nope. It's 102, obviously. Come on. So it will sign me in, right? And now I am signed in, as you see. Again, very few lines of code I had to write. It was more about wiring up the API authentication. So now that I have my front end signed in, let's go and grab the data. Kaboom. It's all working end to end. And that's all we need to do. It's working.
Applause.
Woo-hoo. I mean, it was supposed to work, right? I mean, there was no point of saying you should use Microsoft Identity, but it doesn't really work for all this scenarios. So we should be celebrating the fact that it's working. So
I was just going to say, I'm struck by how simple that is compared to how it was just a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Cam and say that I've always been so terrified of identity and security and authorization and authentication and all those terrifying phrases. And you just made it look so simple. Like I've just been kind of brain dead for like the last couple of years or something. I don't know, but thank you for that. That's awesome.
Well, can I take it in writing? Take it back to my boss and say I did a good job.
Send us a feedback request on the internal thing. Yeah.
No, I mean the whole point is to let developers know that they can be successful with identity without really having to know all the esoteric things that are happening. Now, if you want to go and learn about OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, then we encourage you to go and do that. Nothing is hidden. Everything is an open source. All the libraries are available to you in GitHub. But you don't have to know them to use them. That's the whole point. And you shouldn't be scared about identity.
Awesome.
That's the message.
We have one question here. Do you have a link to the GitHub repo? I assume there are several.
Yes. Do you want it right now? Let me see if I have it handy. I think I have it.
Throw it up on your screen.
That's a very good idea. I just need to remember yes. In fact, it's at the very top because I only updated it a few days ago. So it's here. And it's C Matskas / Blazor wasn't B2C.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So with that,
I want to thank everybody for watching the .NET Doc Show. Check out show recordings, upcoming topics, and more at .NETDocs.dev. And tune in next week when we'll have Neil Swinburga join the show to talk about making Twilio phone calls from Blazor. I want to thank our guest. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I be the well actually guy?
Okay, do that. Oh,
Thank you.
yeah. It just dawned on me. Yeah, sorry. No, next week. I'm reading the script. Right, unscripted entertainment, except for the end of the show. I'm reading the end of the script. Next week is for our international friends. Next week is a national holiday in the U.S. So we will not be airing the .NET Doc Show next week. So come to us. Come back 2 weeks from today. A week from next week. 2 weeks from today, when Neil Swinburga will join the show to talk about Twilio phone calls in Blazor. And I'm going to take the whole week off next week anyway, so I should have known that. Thank you, everybody, and see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, friends.
Bye.